A lot of people are talking about HighByte at the moment, and I'm wondering if everyone knows the difference between HighByte and classical tools like Kepware. Earlier on this channel, I made a video about Kepware, how to use it to connect a manufacturing device to a database server. But in this video, I really want to make clear the difference between both tools, HighByte and Kepware. There are some occasions when each tool is most suited, but we really need to understand the difference in order to make the best technology choice. So in order to do that, we'll use a small lab, a small demo as usual, in order to do it practically. What we will do here is we will try to pull some OPC data inside SQL database. So in that case, I use timescale DB. But the idea is just to use HighByte instead of Kepware in order to understand the difference. To do that, you have here Portainer Stark to have everything inside containers. You just run this Docker compose file with this YAML script, and you should have your laboratory ready to experiment. Here is a detailed demo tutorial, so you can go over it. It's been done brilliantly by my colleague, and the steps are detailed, so you can really reproduce it in your environment. But the idea is just to practically test it before making any assumptions, and then at the end we will discuss about the conclusions. So HighByte to connect some OPC data to some database. How do we do it? First of all, if you go inside HighByte, you have things like connections, models, pipelines. So those are three components that we will use for this demo. Inside the connection, you just define your OPC device as the source and your timescale DB as the destination. For the OPC device, you have to go here, create the link between your HighByte and the actual device. So in that case, it's the host name of my container. I just specify here the ports. And after that, inside the input, I declare, I can browse like the namespace of the OPC server. And inside boiler, you see there are some data already prepared in the simulator that you can use. And I'm using, in that case, I'm using the current temperature, which is here. But yeah, you define those devices, OPC device, timescale DB. So for a database, you need to configure first, of course, the host name of the database name, which is using Postgres, user and passwords. Then you define the table as an output because you want everything to be stored in that database table. So as an output, you just create an insert use case where you will write some information inside this table. It's sorted or partitioned by timestamp every hour, but that's just a detail. Basically, you just reference it as an output. Then once this is defined, you need to create a model, and that will be the base of your of everything that you do inside HighByte. The beauty and maybe the constraint of HighByte is that you have to define a structure before being able to do anything. So it's good because it creates structures, but sometimes it can be cumbersome if you don't need so many structuring at the beginning. So, but anyway, you need to define a boiler device with temperature as an attribute. Then inside your pipeline, so first of all, you create the device, you create the instance of the device. Is the instance, my boiler is an instance of the object boiler. And then this temperature, we need to link it to our OPC UA tag. You will see in the tutorial how to do it, but you basically just browse here all the inputs, you go over OPC UA device, and you will see all the inputs available. Once the instance of the model is defined, now you can create your pipeline. It's a OPC to timescale pipeline. And then it takes the data from the OPC inputs to the database output. To create the pipeline, you just go here, new pipeline, and then you build your flow. So first you have to name it, my pipeline. Then you create source and target. The sources, for you can again navigate inside the inputs. For the targets, you can navigate inside the instances or the outputs, and then you create your pipeline. So once this is done, you will see the data flowing inside timescale. So for instance, if you navigate the database, you will see that configuration is already sending some information there. So let's see, we can select the last 10 information from our database, and you see it here. We can select count also how many data points have been stored. So you see it growing 8, 6, 7. Then on the next request, you will see a higher number, 873. So basically, you're just storing information, which is great because that's what we want to do in this demo. And in both cases, if it's with HighByte or with the previous demo that I recorded in the previous video with Kepware, both are just logging some raw OPC data points into a SQL table. But then, and that's the goal of that video, all of that was just technical stuff, but then we need to understand what's the difference between both tools, because there are some critical, very important differences. That's what we'll discuss now. So first of all, in terms of, let's say, storing the data, for the Kepware, the data logger module inside Kepware just use a, simple, let's say, key value pair. You just mention the name of the information that you want to store, and then it will write it directly as it is inside the database without making any difference between temperature, pressure, and speed. Whatever these information, they will just add them inside the database or table column with the name of the data and the value of the data points. But for HighByte, it does very, very differently. First of all, it gathers all of those information, temperature, pressure, speed, inside the model. And when that model is instantiated, you can use it to route the data into different, let's say, outputs or destination or targets. You can store them inside a timescale DB database like we did, or you can send them via MQTT to a UNS, or you can send them via REST API to something else. But it's very different than the simple storing that we're doing with the data logger in Kepware. So none of them is good or bad. It just depends on what you want to do as a use case. And talking about use case, here is a simple comparison table on when to use which tool. So if you just need to read a data point and write it to SQL table, basically both tools can do it. The moment when you start seeing the difference is when you have to deal with data modeling, transformation of your data, hypertables, multiple destinations if you want to send it to multiple stuff, not just SQL table, but for instance, Kafka or REST API or MQTT, then HighByte becomes definitely interesting. But the issue is Kepware has a lot more protocol and access to field devices than HighByte. Like Kepware, which has been renamed now KepServerX, has been built originally just to communicate with almost anything on the field of a factory or a manufacturing site. So not all protocols can be read by HighByte, and if your focus is just to aggregate or read information from the field, maybe Kepware will be best in your use case. Then you have some small licensing differences. One is, let's say, priced by connection flow, and the other Kepware is priced by driver. And some important infrastructure difference. HighByte has a Docker image. Kepware doesn't have any Docker image. I mean, there was a project to implement it, but it wasn't pushed until the end. So basically, you can just use Kepware on Windows only. But if you really need to do it, it's just something you need to take into consideration, that your edge device where you install Kepware will need to be Windows compared to HighByte, which you can deploy on anything. But those are just differences, and there are not like choices already, but the moment you will see what your use case is when you will understand which tool to use. At least here you have the difference between both, and you know which tool can fit with your use case. A simple, let's say, recap or summary can be like this. Things like Kepware or Top Server, which is the Aviva version of Kepware, are very specialized tools. They are used for connectivity, and they're used to read and convert protocols. They are very excellent when you just want to read only. But other tools, or let's say more recent tools like HighByte or Litmus, for instance, they are best fit for data ops, which is transforming and publishing some data. They look like all-in-one Swiss knives, but you need to pay attention when to use them. You want to use HighByte when you have modeling, you want to structure information inside an UNS or ISA95 structure. You can use HighByte when you have multiple destinations, when you want a Docker or Linux-only environment. But Kepware can also be a good fit if you just need to log your data, to read it from many field protocols, and just store it in the SQL. Kepware can also do that. So at least now you know all the aspects of that questions. And very important, but I say it again, it's important to understand the difference between tools before making a choice in order to avoid any future mistake, because now you cannot see the consequence of your choices, but over time, if you did a very good choice, you can see the benefit of it. But if you did a poor choice, it can create some friction in the process, in the infrastructure, in the technology, even between people. So bear in mind difference between HighByte and Kepware. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll meet in the next one.